I remember the day I realized I had always been invisible. I was 12, sitting at the dinner table, watching my parents celebrate my older brother's achievements, the promotion, the praise, the money, the compliments. I smiled politely, clapped when they asked, laughed at the right moments, but when it was my turn to speak, the conversation moved on before I could even finish a sentence. At the time, I didn't know it was deliberate. I thought maybe I was just awkward, or not interesting enough. Growing up, I had been the quiet one. I was gentle, empathetic, and trusting. I liked writing letters no one would read, making small gifts for birthdays no one noticed, and keeping secrets for people who might not have kept mine. I loved my family, I still do, but loving them was like loving shadows. I could feel their presence, but they never truly saw me. When I turned 18, I thought things might change. I imagined moving into adulthood would bring acknowledgement, respect, maybe even some control over my own life in the family. I was wrong. It was subtle at first. Invitations that slipped my mind for vacations. Stories retold with my name left out. Decisions made for the family that didn't include me. And then, the final blow, I discovered I had been erased from their will. Every asset, every property, every detail, they had quietly ensured that my existence, financially, didn't matter. I wasn't angry at first. I was hurt. And deeply, profoundly sad. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, wondering where I had gone wrong. Was it me? Was it something I said? I replayed years of birthdays, holidays, and conversations, searching for a clue that might explain why they had chosen to write me out, as if I were never there. The betrayal wasn't loud, it wasn't violent or dramatic. It was quiet, calculated, and it cut me deeper than any shouting match could have. I didn't confront them immediately. I cried, I wrote in my journal, I let the pain sit inside me like a stone. I allowed myself to feel, because I realized early on that anger without understanding is destructive. I wanted clarity before confrontation, wisdom before reaction. Slowly, the heartbreak transformed into quiet observation. I began noticing the patterns, the way my brother was praised for small successes, the way my parents' decisions always excluded me, the way they expected loyalty without reciprocity. Even in that sadness, I found small victories. I learned to trust my instincts, to recognize emotional dishonesty, and to value my own voice, even if no one else did. I focused on school, on my friends, on small joys that didn't require approval. I became someone who could sit quietly at the edge of the room, noticing everything, learning everything, and slowly building my own sense of worth independent of their validation. And yet, despite everything, I still loved them. I loved the memories that were real, the laughter that had been genuine, the fleeting moments of care that occasionally appeared in unexpected ways. Love, I realized, could exist even alongside betrayal. It didn't make the betrayal less painful, but it made me stronger, because I wasn't carrying bitterness blindly, I was learning, quietly, who I was meant to be. So I waited. I waited for life to reveal its lessons, for clarity to arrive, for my own time to come. I didn't know when that would be, or how, but I had begun to understand that my worth didn't depend on being seen by those who refused to see me. And in that quiet, painful space, I started to grow. I was invisible to them. But I was beginning to see myself. For years after I discovered I had been erased from the will, life continued as though nothing had changed. On the surface, I was polite, attentive, even cheerful when around my family. I smiled at dinners, laughed at jokes, and nodded when decisions were announced. But inside, I felt a quiet fracture running through every moment, every interaction. The betrayal wasn't loud. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shouting, no slamming of doors. It was subtle, like a shadow in the corner of a room, always present but almost invisible. Invitations came late, if at all. My opinions were dismissed as not important or too idealistic. Conversations I had once thought were open and loving now felt transactional, strategic. I began noticing the way they manipulated words, how flattery was given to my brother but withheld from me. I realized, with a sharp ache in my chest, that my parents had been building a narrative in which I didn't exist. I remember one evening in particular, sitting quietly in the living room while my family discussed plans for a new business venture. They asked my brother questions, discussed projections, and debated strategies. I stayed silent at first, unsure if I even had the right to speak. When I finally offered an idea, a small, carefully considered suggestion, it was brushed aside with a polite but dismissive, "We'll think about it." My stomach sank, and I withdrew back into the chair, my hands folded, my voice swallowed. That moment crystallized something I had sensed for years: I was no longer a part of their world. It hurt, of course. It hurt to realize that the people I had loved most, trusted most, had deliberately made me invisible. But the pain was also strangely liberating. Once I acknowledged the betrayal, I could stop pretending. I didn't have to seek approval, validation, or acknowledgement from people who had never given it freely. I could exist fully, for myself, and begin to build a life unshaped by their biases and exclusions. I started observing them differently. I noticed the greed hidden behind polite smiles, the subtle manipulations that ensured my brother always came first. I saw the small lies woven into casual conversations, the stories rewritten, the truths omitted, the accomplishments minimized. And I realized that my heartbreak wasn't just about the will, it was about a pattern of disregard that had been in motion for years, unnoticed by me, invisible in plain sight. Yet, despite everything, I never let my anger rule me. I cried in private, wrote in my journals, and walked alone late at night, letting the emotions settle like water in a jar. I allowed myself to feel the grief fully, to mourn the family I thought I had, while simultaneously beginning to redefine the family I could have in my own life, one built on respect, honesty, and mutual care. It was in that quiet observation that I began to grow stronger. I became calm where I had once been nervous, wise where I had once been trusting to a fault. I understood that emotional betrayal could not be undone, but it could be understood. And understanding it gave me power, not over them, but over myself. I chose boundaries over confrontation, dignity over drama, and patience over impulsive action. By the time I finished university, I had built a life apart from the family that had once excluded me, a life filled with friends who truly saw me, opportunities one had earned with my own hands, and a sense of inner peace I had never known before. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was simply me. And yet, I knew the story wasn't finished. Life has a way of returning the truths we ignore, and one day, their world would intersect with mine in ways they hadn't anticipated. I didn't know when, or how, but I was ready. Because I had learned the most important lesson: sometimes, the quietest strength is the one that cannot be ignored. It had been nearly a decade since I truly felt connected to my family. I had built my own life, steady, independent, and quietly fulfilling. I had a career I loved, friends who cherished me, and a sense of self-worth that no one could take away. The past, with all its heartbreak and betrayal, felt distant, until the unexpected invitation arrived. It was a simple text from my mother, almost casual in tone: "Family meeting at 7 p.m. Don't be late." For a moment, I stared at the screen, my heart tightening. There was no explanation, no hint of the reason why. Part of me wanted to ignore it entirely, to let them continue their business without my presence. But another part, the part that had learned patience, observation, and subtle power, recognized that this was an opportunity. Not to seek revenge, not to plead for acknowledgement, but to step into the room with clarity and dignity, and to witness the truth for myself. I didn't respond immediately. I took time to prepare. I thought about what I would say, what I would observe, and, most importantly, how I would carry myself. I wasn't going to arrive with anger, and I wasn't going to arrive as the girl who had been erased. I was going to arrive as the woman I had become, calm, composed, and unshakable. The evening arrived. I walked into the familiar house, the familiar hallways, but everything felt different. There was a tension in the air that I had never noticed before, a nervous energy that suggested things were not going smoothly. My parents greeted me with polite smiles, but there was a stiffness there, a hesitation that betrayed their confidence. My brother, usually so self-assured, avoided eye contact and fidgeted with his tie. I realized, with a quiet satisfaction, that the cracks I had predicted were finally visible. As the meeting began, I listened more than I spoke. I observed. I watched the subtle panic in their voices as they discussed dwindling profits, missed opportunities, and mistakes that they could not easily fix. I noticed how quickly they turned to my brother for advice, expecting the same loyalty they had always demanded, but he too seemed unsure, unprepared. And I remained silent, letting the room reveal itself to me fully before I said a word. When they finally turned to me, it wasn't with genuine welcome. It was curiosity. Perhaps they expected a reaction of desperation, an emotional outburst, or even anger. But I had none of that to give. Instead, I spoke slowly, carefully, clearly. I offered insights they had overlooked, suggestions grounded in knowledge, and reminders of practical solutions they had ignored for years. I didn't demand respect. I didn't need to justify my presence. I simply existed in the room with calm authority, letting my competence speak louder than any accusation could. And as I spoke, I could see the shift. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. They began to listen. They began to take note. And in that quiet exchange, I felt a profound sense of empowerment. I had not sought to humiliate or punish them. I had not arrived with anger or drama. I had arrived as myself, strong, composed, and undeniably present. By the end of the meeting, I knew that the family dynamics had changed. They had been forced to recognize my worth, not because I demanded it, but because I embodied it. And I left that evening with a quiet smile, knowing that true strength is not loud. True strength is calm. True strength is measured, wise, and unshakable. I didn't need to announce victory. I didn't need applause or acknowledgement. I had done what I came to do. I had held my ground, observed the truth, and stepped into my own power. And as I walked away from the table, I realized that sometimes, the most powerful statements are made not with words of anger, but with quiet, unwavering presence. The morning after the meeting, I woke up earlier than usual. The sunlight filtered softly through my curtains, and for a moment, I just breathed. No tension, no anticipation, no need to rehearse my next move. I felt free. Not because I had proved something to them, but because I had proven something to myself. When I returned to the house later that week, it was with calm purpose. My parents and brother had called another meeting, this time to discuss decisions that required immediate attention. I arrived, not with anger, not with demand, but with quiet confidence. I had learned over the years that dignity speaks louder than shouts, that strength does not need recognition to exist, and that true respect is earned through consistency and calm authority, not through dramatic displays. I listened first, as I always had, watching the subtle ways stress and panic twisted their words. There were moments when I could feel them silently hoping for a misstep, for the girl they had ignored for so long to falter, to react emotionally, to beg or plead. But I didn't. I simply engaged with the facts, offered solutions, and reminded them, without any trace of judgment, of the consequences they had ignored for years. It was quiet, but it was firm. It was not revenge, but it was justice. Because justice is not always loud, sometimes it is the patient observation of truth, followed by calm, intelligent action. By the time the meeting ended, I realized that they had learned something far more important than any business lesson. They had learned that I could not be dismissed. They had learned that my worth did not depend on their acknowledgement. And perhaps most importantly, they had learned that the consequences of their choices, both personal and professional, were theirs to bear, not mine. I left that evening without fanfare. No one called after me to thank me, no one rushed to apologize, no one bowed to my insight. And yet, I felt complete. I had witnessed the unfolding of natural consequences, and I had played my part, not as a vengeful daughter, but as a wise, self-respecting woman. In the days that followed, I continued to observe quietly. My family began to take responsibility for their own decisions. They made mistakes, they adjusted, they learned, or they didn't. But none of it was my burden anymore. I had given what I could: guidance, clarity, and presence. Everything else was theirs to navigate. And in that clarity, I discovered a deeper sense of peace. I realized that emotional justice is not about humiliation, confrontation, or proving someone wrong. Emotional justice is about boundaries, self-respect, and the quiet knowledge that you do not need approval to exist fully. It is about walking away from manipulation with your dignity intact, about observing the truth, and allowing life to reveal its natural consequences. That night, as I sat by my window, I thought about the years I had spent invisible, the pain I had endured, and the strength I had quietly built. I smiled softly, not because I had won against them, but because I had never lost myself. My past, with all its hurt, had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I was free to live fully, unburdened by the need to be seen or validated. I had learned that love and respect are not owed by anyone, they are given freely, and when withheld, they cannot diminish the worth of the person who truly knows themselves. And in that lesson, I found serenity. I had arrived at the quiet, sweet place I had been building all along, a place of inner peace, emotional strength, and self-respect that no one could take away. I was finally, completely, myself.